For centuries, the Spanish searched for the Fountain of Youth. Explorers crossed the Atlantic chasing stories carried through missionaries, traders, and frightened guides. Some accounts spoke of hidden springs that restored strength to the elderly. Others described sacred waters that certain tribes refused to approach. No two stories matched, but the rumor spread. And because it promised something every human being wants, more time, the legend refused to die. If the Spanish had truly found such a spring, history would remember the place. Kings would have guarded it. Empires would have fought over it. Instead, the legend remained unresolved, which means the truth stayed hidden. Because the Fountain of Youth was real, and I found it by accident. I was 36 when it happened. At the time, I worked contract jobs inspecting land before construction projects. Developers hired people like me to assess drainage, sinkhole risk, and soil stability before heavy equipment moved in. Most of the places I worked were forgotten land. Fields, forest, old properties no one had touched in decades. That year I was working in northern Florida, near land that once held a small Spanish mission centuries earlier. Almost nothing remained of it, just scattered stone fragments buried under trees and mud. History had already swallowed the place once. Soon, construction would erase the rest. It had been raining for days. Water softened the ground, and several shallow depressions had opened where limestone below the soil had eroded. Late one afternoon, most of the crew returned to the trucks to wait out the storm. I stayed behind to finish measurements near a section of exposed stone. Then the ground disappeared. I fell straight through the earth. Mud, roots, and broken limestone collapsed beneath my feet, and I dropped into darkness. I hit the floor of a hidden underground chamber roughly 15 feet below the surface. My shoulders slammed against rock. My head struck the stone hard enough to split the skin above my eye. For several seconds, I could barely breathe. Then I found my flashlight and saw the spring. The chamber looked ancient, part natural cave, part old structure that had been swallowed by the ground over centuries. Broken bricks lay scattered across the floor. A half-buried stone arch stood against one wall. Beyond it, a thin crack in the rock allowed clear water to flow into a shallow basin worn smooth by time. I went to the water because I needed it. My mouth was full of dirt and blood. I knelt, washed my face, and drank. The water was unbelievably cold. Cleaner than anything that should exist underground in a muddy collapse chamber. It tasted faintly metallic, then strangely sweet. I drank several handfuls. Minutes later, I heard voices above. The crew had noticed the collapse. They lowered a rope and pulled me out. At the time, I thought the fall would be the most memorable part of that day. I was wrong. Within weeks, something began changing. My shoulder healed unusually fast. The cut above my eye left almost no scar. Old aches disappeared. Then something stranger happened. Scars I'd carried for years faded. Gray hairs darkened. My face began looking younger. At first I told myself I was imagining it. But other people noticed too. Co-workers joked about it. Friends asked if I had started some treatment. My mother didn't joke. She simply looked at me and said, "You look younger." That was the moment I knew something was wrong. I went back to the collapse site. I needed to see the chamber again. But when I reached it, the place had already changed. More rain had come. The ground had shifted again. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, burying the rear section of the cave. The crack in the rock where the water had flowed was sealed behind rubble and mud. The basin itself was broken and dry. The spring was gone. The water that changed my life existed in my world for only a few days. Then it disappeared forever. Over the next year, my appearance continued changing. Then it stopped. My body stabilized somewhere around 30 years old. Years passed. Other people aged. I didn't. At first, people joked. Then they asked questions. Eventually, those questions became suspicion. And suspicion is dangerous when you have no explanation. Because I had no proof, no water sample, no surviving spring, only a body that no longer followed time. So I left. First the city, then the state. New job, new address, eventually a new identity. After a few years, I moved again, and again. I never married, not because I lacked chances, because relationships require time to move the same way for both people. Mine didn't anymore. The longer I stayed anywhere, the more noticeable the difference became. So, I kept moving. Different states, different countries, different lives. My mother lived another 10 years after the accident. During that decade, I watched her grow older while I remained the same. Her hair turned white. Her hands began to shake. Her world slowly narrowed. Mine stayed frozen. One day, she looked at me carefully and said, "You still look like yourself." She meant it kindly, but what she meant was that time had stopped touching me. She died while I still looked 30. That was the last year I used my real name. People think immortality would make someone powerful. It doesn't. It makes them vulnerable. If the world believed my story, my life would end immediately. Scientists would want experiments. Governments would want control. Corporations would want profit. So I remain silent. But sometimes I wonder if I am the only one. History is long. The world is old. And the spring I found existed only briefly before disappearing. If something like that could happen once, it could have happened before. Somewhere in another century, another person may have stumbled onto the same impossible accident. Someone who drank once, then watched the source vanish forever. If people like that exist, they would have learned the same lesson I did. They would not reveal themselves. They would live quietly, move often, change names, disappear into ordinary life. And perhaps that is why the legend of the Fountain of Youth never dies. Not because it was ever proven, but because, somewhere in the world, a few people know the story is true, and none of them can ever say it out loud.